Welcome back to the series on the Mark Levine jazz piano book. And this is part 2 of Sus and Phrygian chords. And really, because the Mark Levine jazz piano book, it's really difficult to get through. It is the book that everyone recommends that you should use. But as I mentioned in the last video, actually, it's much better to switch to the Mark Levine Jazz Theory book, which looks like this. It's over there, which looks like that. So, yes, I'm going to be going straight to the Jazz Theory book. It's so much more useful to understand all of the stuff to do with sus and sus flat 9. So, straight away, I'm going to page 41, and we're talking about the Mixolydian mode. So, I'm going to assume that you know your modes. And if you don't know your modes, keep watching if you want. But, you know, this is the other kind of point I was making in the last video. Everything's in the wrong order. And this is why he explains it better in the Jazz Theory book, because he's already explained modes and then explained sus chords and sus flat 2 with the context of modes. So if you don't understand about the modes there, you can actually go back and watch the earlier video that I covered in the Mark Levine Jazz Piano book, where we did talk about modes. But really, we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit here. But, you know, you might want to watch it anyway and see what you pick up. So just to recap very, very briefly, two main ways of thinking about a Mixolydian mode. One is you can think about it as G to G using the C major scale. So basically using white notes on the piano. If you go G to G, that is a Mixolydian mode. So it's basically C major starting and ending on G. Now, in one of the earlier videos, I did explain why I think that's a horrible way to learn modes. Yes, you kind of do need to understand at some point that's how we get modes, but it's much easier to think of them as scale degrees, where you're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. So if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is a major scale, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1 is a Mixolydian mode. So if you look at the chord, what you have in a seventh chord, the 1, the 3, the 5, and the flat 7, this is the scale that you play over a dominant seventh. So you could call it a dominant scale if you wanted to. So anyway, on page 41, if you play a G dominant seventh and you play the Mixolydian mode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7 in the right hand, the point that Mark Levine makes, which is basically what you get in almost any book about learning to play jazz and about how you solo over a dominant chord, the dominant seventh chord being here 1, 3, 5, flat 7. The point that he makes straight away is that if you play the 4, it generally doesn't sound that good. And he does make the point on this page. It's dissonant. Dissonant isn't always bad. Sometimes you want this, like, dissonance can be very emotional sometimes. But generally, if you're soloing round, you can hear that just doesn't sound good. It just sounds quite clunky. So, you know, if we go... you can hear that C, the 4, the fourth scale degree, you can hear that something just doesn't work all that well. Now, there are ways in which you can get that note to sound good, but basically, this is then what Mark Levine goes on to say. Well, before I go on to that, everyone calls the 4 an avoid note, and you'll hear a lot in jazz education, in jazz theory books, in jazz piano books. Don't use the 4 over a dominant seventh. It's an avoid note. So he talks a little bit about the fact that pre-bop jazz musicians only use the 4 as a passing note. So you can go, it doesn't sound that bad, but you can't go, you can go from the 3 to the 5, from the 5 to the 3 via the 4. But you can't just stay on the 4. That just sounds really unpleasant. It's an avoid note. And then he mentions that early bebop people just raised the 4th. So that's one way of dealing with it. But then you have to go to a different mode, and I'm not going to cover that at the moment. So then on page 43, he then gives a different definition, which is a much more interesting definition than you had in the jazz piano book. And what he says here is that a good definition of a sus chord is a dominant seventh. So he says here a 5 chord, but basically a dominant seventh in which the fourth doesn't sound like an avoid note. So yeah, most people's definition is that the sus, as I talked about in the last video, the sus chord is where you have a 4 instead of a 3. Now, why you can have a 4 instead of a 3, if I get rid of the 3 in the left hand, and let's say in the right hand we play the 2 and the 4, that sounds okay. That sounds quite nice because it's the 3. With the moment we add the 3, that's when the 4 in the right hand sounds like an avoid note. One reason for this, if you look at the exact voicing I'm playing here at the moment, the 3 is in the left hand and the 4 is in the right hand. And if you look at the interval that you have between the 3 and the 4, that is a minor ninth, which is arguably the most dissonant interval that you can have in music. This interval, most teachers will say, and in fact, my jazz teacher used to point out to me that doesn't work very well because you've got a minor ninth in there, and sometimes I wouldn't even have realized that I had a minor ninth in there. But he had this amazing ear that's like minor ninths. I hear a minor ninth, don't like it. So that's one reason. So if we put the 4 in the left hand and we put the 3 in the right hand, that actually kind of sounds okay. So that is a way that you get a sus voicing by removing that minor ninth interval. Now, personally, I'm not sure I personally would call this a sus chord. To me, this is more like a major 11th because you've got sorry, not major. Sorry, let me rewind because it's dominant. I would call this just basically a dominant 11th because you've got a dominant 7th with the 7, with the 3, and because you've added this note here, to me this is just a dominant 11th. But Mark Levine would call this a sus chord because you have a 4 and the 4 does not sound like an avoid note. So I don't then really know, well, what would Mark Levine class as a dominant 11th? I don't really understand. But like I said, it's the Wild West. In Mark Levine's book, literally, he calls this a sus chord. Anyway, you've got the previous video if you want, and in that video I refer to another video that I made where I refer quite a lot to the way that I personally define sus chords. Anyway, hopefully this is explaining now a little bit better why Mark Levine calls this a sus chord, and that basically it is really useful to know that most of the time when you have a dominant 7th, the 4 is an avoid note, and he does have this interesting definition. In quotes, a good definition of a sus chord is a 5 chord or a dominant 7th in which the 4th doesn't sound like an avoid note. So then, interestingly, on page 44, Mark Levine points out sus chords have been an everyday sound in jazz only since the 1960s, which again is like, well, why have you put them as chapter 4 right at the beginning of your jazz piano book? Why not let's just cover all the fundamentals first? Anyway, although he then points out, really nice example here, that Duke Ellington and Art Tatum were playing them in the 1930s and 40s, play figure 327, and you'll hear the A sus chord Art Tatum played on the intro to Jerome Kern's Why Was I Born? And this is lovely. So what we've got here, scale degrees 151, 4, flat 7, 2, and 5. So really like this chord, lovely. Very, very simple sounding. And then he writes, this is not a piano book, but because students of all instruments constantly ask, how do you voice a sus chord? So yeah, we went over this. You basically, in your right hand, you go down a tone or a whole step. So if you're playing G, let's say in the right hand we're playing a G second inversion triad over a G, well then you move the right hand down a tone or a whole step, and this is how you get your G sus sound. And then he points out that this resolves really nicely if you just slip the right hand down. It's a really nice way to resolve onto your C major 7 chord. And then, I don't know why he didn't put this in the jazz piano book, but he then gives you a really lovely new voicing that is another way of resolving to a C major 9 chord. So he says the notes in the G sus chord are the same as they were except for the added E, the 13th of G sus. So what we've got here, if we take G and move it down to F and put that over the G, so now we've got G sus. But what he's saying, if we add the 13th, which is the E in the right hand, and then we slide that down diatonically in the right hand, that's really nice. Now, that would be really useful to know in the jazz piano book. That's so nice to know, but he's hidden it away here in this, chapter on Mixolydian modes in the jazz theory book. That needs to be in the jazz piano book. That's lovely. That's really nice. And then he points out that there's a different inversion you can have in the right hand of that. So this is figure 330. So it's the same notes as what we had here in figure 329, but just moved into a different inversion. And then, good jazz is all about good voice leading. And all the time, you don't want to jump from here to there. You want this to be really nice voice leading. So he gives this example going from there to there. Except I personally would ask, why don't you do the same thing? So in figure 329, you went from here and you basically shifted everything down a note diatonically. Well, what if we just do the same thing here and do something similar to move there? So you're going from the G sus with, you've got the flat 7, the 2, the 4 and the 13th. Well, why not just shift everything down there? Or you could even shift down to go for a 6 chord. Or you can just do what he's written here, which I guess is quite nice. Yeah, you can do any of those. I think these examples really need to be in the jazz piano book. They're super useful. And then on the next page, on page 45, you've got some really beautiful examples. And in particular, the Bill Evans examples. And again, I really think these need to be in the jazz piano book. These are so nice. So it talks about alternating major 7th and then the dominant sus chords. So I really like this example in figure 332. C major 7, G sus. And the nice thing about the G sus is it allows you to have the C at the bottom kind of as this pedal note. So instead of something like, if it didn't have sus, it would be like C major 7, G dominant, C major 7, G dominant. That doesn't sound all that great, but this. And then we go to G dominant, but keeping the C in the bass. It's so nice. So in the right hand, you've got, if we think of G, the 1, the 2, the 4, and the flat 7, but over this pedal tone of the C in the left hand. It's lovely. That's really beautiful and worth using a lot. That's really lovely. And then he points out again, like we had in the previous video, 2 songs did a lot to popularize sus chords among jazz musicians, John Coltrane's Naima and Herbie Hancock's Maiden Voyage. So I think I gave an example of Maiden Voyage in the last one. But the E flat sus chord in the first bar of Naima, sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, it's nice. But this chord here, really nice that. So again, in the right hand, you've got the flat 7, the 2, the 4, and then you have the 13th as well. And so that's like the modern sound, like I was saying in the last video, where modern is basically everything from the 60s onwards. If it wasn't sus, we'd have something more like... and obviously, that's not that cool sounding. That's a really nice sort of cool hip modern sound, you know, if you were, if we think that modern and hip is from the 60s. Anyway, and then we've got Maiden Voyage, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, which is the same as what we had in the last video. And then on page 46, again, he says again, a persistent myth is that the fourth takes the place of the third in a sus chord. This was true at one time, but in the 1960s, a growing acceptance of dissonance led pianists and guitarists to play sus voicings with both the third and the fourth. So, I mean, anyway, we've explored this now in quite a bit of depth, and the example that he gives here is this one here. And again, as he points out, I can't remember where, but basically if you have the fourth at the bottom and then the third at the top, you avoid the minor ninths. And so he calls this a sus. I'm not sure everyone would call this sus. It's the Wild West. For the sake of this book, okay, in this book, this is a sus chord. And he gives a load of other examples like he did in the jazz piano book. Are they the same? I think they might be the same as the ones in the jazz piano book. Yes, he then says on the next page, you could play the fourth above the third, but the result would be a much more dissonant chord. What makes this chord so dissonant is the interval between B and C and minor ninths, the last dissonant interval. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think he points this out in the jazz piano book. And this is like just so much better explained in this book. So here he gives you the voicing if you put the four above the three, making minor ninths. And you kind of can have that, but it is a lot more dissonant. But then he points out the entire history of Western music is characterized as the gradual acceptance of dissonant intervals. So basically, as we move forwards and forwards in time, we become more and more accepting of dissonant stuff. So don't be too scared of things that are dissonant. He's saying, you know, there is a place for them. Thelonious Monk was playing major seventh chords with the interval of a minor ninth, but Monk at that time was considered pretty out. And I've got to say, you know, like Thelonious Monk, he's not my taste. You know, so much of his stuff to my ears, to my particular delicate, sensitive ears. I don't really. But like to me, a lot of Monk just sounds like... Yeah, I mean, it's not that, but Monk does kind of have that effect on my ears. So, you know, he'll play chords apparently like this in figure 339. But, you know, I'm generally not a fan of Monk. But if you do like Monk, you probably will want to play these sus chords with the four above the three, because you'll like these really scrunchy sounds. Okay, so then he goes straight on to the Phrygian mode and the sus flat 9 chord. He's got this okay example, and these examples are so much more useful to kind of understand this sus flat 9 in terms of the Phrygian mode. I'll talk about the Phrygian mode in just a second. So we've got this example here. This is Kenny Barron's Golden Lotus, and we've got... So, in terms of scale degrees, in the left hand here, we've got 1, flat 2 or flat 9, 4, and 5. So, let me just do a quick recap on the Phrygian mode. Phrygian mode is E to E using the C major scale. Or a major scale, you go from the 3 to the 3. So, C major, E to E. Or, like as I talk about in the other video to do with modes from the Mark Levine piano book, it's so much useful to think of scale degree. So if we play C Phrygian, we've got 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1. You can think of it as like a natural minor. Natural minor is 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1. So you basically take a natural minor and just flatten the 2. That's how you have a Phrygian mode. So you've got 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1. It's minor with a flat 2 is really, to me, the most simple way of thinking about it. Then you've got this lovely example in figure 342 from Kenny Dorham's La Mesha. And so we've got... I really like this. This chord here is lovely. So we start with just an F sharp sus, scale degrees in the right hand, flat 7 to 4, 5. And then we just basically, we take the normal sus and we just flatten the 9 or flatten the 2. Isn't that beautiful? That's lovely. And what I like about this is a way that I personally intuitively would always use the, well, when I say always, 9 times out of 10, when I wanted to use a sus flat 9, it's just so obvious to me that what I want to do is I want to play a normal sus and then take it to the sus flat 9. And I think it's weird that he didn't point this out in the jazz piano book, but he puts it here in the jazz theory book. Yeah, this is a really good way of using it. And I think I even pointed out when I did the example of Autumn Leaves that you could just play a normal sus, then flat the 9. But instead of just like what Mark Levine suggested that you experiment with in the jazz piano book, which is just to sit here for 2 bars, like that with 1 chord over 2 bars, or even just the flat 9. That's so dull. But here, this is exactly what I would do. This is, you do the normal sus for a bar, then you flat the 9. That's a much better way of using it. So again, excellent way of using it. If you're only using the jazz piano book, you're going to miss all these, interesting things that you can do with it. Also, another thing worth pointing out, the very first way that Mark Levine explained what a Phrygian sus flat 9 chord is that you play, I can't even remember how he explained this, like you play a dominant 7 rootless voicing shape and then you move the left hand down. It's so confusing. And I think his voicing is like, what would it be? You had the 1 at the top, you had the flat 9, the 4, the 5, and then the 1. Because in the right hand, what this is actually a rootless voicing for a different chord, a dominant. But he explained that this is how you get your Phrygian flat 9 sus. But then here, it's a completely new way where he doesn't explain you play a dominant. No, it's just you're thinking about it in terms of the Phrygian scale. And here his example is flat 9, flat 7. Flat 9 or the flat 2, 4 and 5. And the way that he explains it later on, he does explain it a little bit later, as I remember it, he just tells you the important scale tones that you need to cover, which are the flat 7, the flat 9, the 4 and the 5. I'm pretty sure that's what he says later on. And in fact, yeah, this is literally what he says right on the next page, on page 49. And this is the best explanation. Not it's a dominant 7th with the root on the 6th or whatever the hell he said in the earlier video in the jazz piano book. He's basically saying the notes most often played on the sus flat 9 chord are the root, the flat 9, the 4th, the 5th, and the 7th. The flat 7th, really, he should say. Or he explains it as like in figure 345. So here he actually points out if you're playing an E sus flat 9, you need the root, the flat 9, the 4, the 5, and the flat 7. So if you're hitting all those chord tones, all those scale tones, scale degrees, that's what you need to make a really nice sus flat 9, which is way better explained than in the jazz piano book. So sus flat 9 chords are a relatively new sound in jazz harmony. Again, why cover this so early in the jazz piano book? But I'll shut up about that now. So figure 346, because basically saying Duke Ellington anticipated this sound by doing it from 1953. So let's take a look at this one. Nice. I sounded like that guy off the Fast Show. Nice. Anyway. Yeah, and I was just realising, what is it here that was throwing me as I was sight reading it? Because the second time I was like, huh? And then I realised it's kind of spelt wrong. I'm just going to be a little bit fussy about this because this is why it's important to use double flats, to use enharmonic. Like, for example, a lot of people, just as a bit of a rabbit hole, a bit of a side thing, a lot of people will get confused and think, why must people say C flat when the note is clearly B? Why C flat and not B? Why not just call it by the most simple thing? But when I was sight reading this just now and I play A flat in my left hand, and then in my right hand, I see an A, and I'm like, what? And my like there's a fuse switch in my brain that just goes, what? Because really, the A flat is the first scale degree. What we then want is we want a flat 9 or a flat 2. So 1 is A flat, and basically you want every note to have a different letter. So if an A of some kind is the first scale degree, that means a B of some kind must be the second scale degree. Now if you have, so in the key of A flat major, B flat is the second scale degree. Now, if you want to flat the second scale degree, it then becomes B double flat. I would personally have found this chord much easier to read with a B double flat in the right hand, because then my brain goes, oh yeah, that's the second scale degree that's flat, as a B double flat. But when I see A flat and then an A in the right hand, especially without an accidental, my brain just goes, what? That makes no sense. It's like when you're reading a word that's spelt wrong. So anyway, I just want to point that out, that strictly speaking in the right hand, this A, strictly speaking, should be a B double flat, because B is the second scale degree of a B of some kind is the second scale degree of a scale that has an A of some kind. So anyway. So, and then this is the voicing that we learn in the previous video in the jazz piano book, where you have the flat 9, the 4, the 5, and well, except you had a 1 at the top, but here we've got the flat 7 at the top. Beautiful. Yeah, very, very nice. And then figure 37. Listen to the melodic sound of Phrygian harmony. Freddie Hubbard plays this line in his solo on Dolphin Dance. And notice how many nice examples that we get in this book. It is worth definitely having the jazz piano book, but really I think everyone who reads it needs to supplement it with the jazz theory book. That's gorgeous. That's lovely. And I love this sort of clustery voicing in the left hand. And this is, it's a much better way of understanding how to make a sus flat 9 chord, because in the jazz piano book, you were just basically told, make a dominant 7th shape, move the left. No. You just basically need the 1, the flat 9, the 4, and the 5. And in fact, here, you just fill in that flat 7 that's missing here with the melody note. Beautiful. 2, the 2 minor, the 5 sus flat 9. Yeah, really, really beautiful that. A beautiful example of Phrygian harmony is the E flat sus flat 9 chord that McCoy Tyner improvises over the intro. So here we have another one, 348. And again, this is the voicing that we learned in the last video. You've got the flat 9, the 4, the 5, and then the 1 at the top. So I think that what I'm going to do, I was going to try and cover the other part in the Mark Levine jazz theory book, which covered the modes of the melodic minor with the sus flat 9, but I'm going to cover that in another video, I think. So anyway, there are lots of other examples. This book is great for examples, and they're so useful. They're such useful voicings to have on the piano. And on the one hand, maybe one reason why Mark Levine doesn't go into them in the jazz piano book is because it's too early in the book to introduce all of this stuff. But then that just further, backs my point that he shouldn't have introduced these things so early in the book, so that he could have talked in a little bit more depth later in the book about all of this stuff. Anyway, so here's some more. Ooh. Just at the end, that's gorgeous. Now, he does kind of break his own definition because he hasn't included a 7th in there, but that's lovely. And yeah, I love these minor major 7th sounds, but we'll cover that another time. So basically, all of this is irrelevant. You don't really need to know what any of this is so far. You don't need to know this. It's here. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, I really like that. And then what have we got on this next one? Oh, that's just so... Oh, it's that the flat 9 sus chords are so soulful. Beautiful. So much soul. Oh, sorry, wrong rhythm. Really beautiful, that. And these examples, they're so worth, getting to know, getting your hands around them, letting them influence, and what's the word I'm looking for? Inspire the kinds of things that you're going to do. Here's another one. So tasty, so tasty. So not this one, but here. Ah, so tasty. Beautiful, beautiful. And then... So you have to be quite careful to bring out that A flat in that voicing. So, yeah, there, I wasn't bringing out the A flat enough before. Oh, so soulful. So, yeah, I love this G minor add 2. And then I love the way that just gets moved down to this. And what's lovely about this, that's just the 1, the flat 9, and the 4. You don't even have the 5 or the 7. Lovely. Need more A flat. So delicious. So, ignoring what he says about bass players, because we don't need to know that, sus flat 9 chords, like other sus chords, usually function as 5 chords. And yeah, very much we need to know that. They are functioning as dominant chords that want to resolve down the 5th. And I think every single example that I've played so far is acting as a dominant, as something that wants to go down the 5th. Even though it doesn't have a 3rd in it, and the scale that it's taken from is minor. So, Phrygian, 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1. And we're just taking the 1, the flat 2, and the 4. Usually it's the minimum, and sometimes adding the 5 and the flat 7. And if we're soloing over the top of it, so say I'm playing this, and I'm soloing, which is not great soloing because it's all very scaling. It really wants to go down to... it goes down the 5th. So it gives you a little example here, figure 354, that we can take it down the 5th to, and that is its function. Even though the Phrygian doesn't have a 3 in it, it does function as a dominant chord that wants to go down the 5th. Sus flat 9 chords are often played in place of sus chords, dominant 7th chords, and 2-5 progressions. We'll get to this in chapter 14, advanced reharmonization verbs. Yeah, anyway. Now, actually, I won't put it in this video, but only yesterday I was coming up with some guitar stuff. I was trying to reharmonize some pop songs on guitar and turn them into jazz. And there was one point where I actually used a sus chord in place of a 2-5, because what I said in the last video, I said I don't hear that a sus chord can imply a 2-5 progression. But then I need to eat my words today, because there was one particular chord sequence, and I won't play it today, I'll play it in the future video, where I was thinking I want a 2-5 here, and I played the sus chord, and I was like, oh, that does give me the flavour of the 2-5. I think I just hadn't really come across any examples in the Mark Levine book where he kind of really made that clear. But in this example I came up with, I was like, oh, I hear it here. But anyway, so sus flat 9 chords are often played in place of sus chords, dominant 7th chords and 2-5 progressions. Also, a scale other than Phrygian is often played over sus flat 9 chords. And again, I'm going to come to this in a different chapter, in a different video, the next video. In the next video, I will be talking about the modes of the melodic minor and how this applies to sus chords. It's going to be incredibly useful. So that's it for today with the next section of talking about chapter 4 of the Mark Levine book. You really do properly need, I think, this information in the jazz theory book to really make that information useful and make it come alive and make it a thing that's going to inspire your playing in the jazz piano book. So it might be that you don't want to rush out and buy the jazz theory book because I'm showing you here the stuff that it tells you. But yeah, in general, I'm just going to go on this slight rabbit hole. The jazz piano book, like I've already explained, it's only really useful to people once you already understand everything that's in it. If you're trying to learn how to play jazz piano from scratch, it's unbelievably difficult to wade through that jazz piano book. And again, part of this problem is that a lot of this information doesn't really make full sense without using the jazz theory book as well. But then I've got to say that, when I was younger, I did try going through the Mark Levine jazz theory book as well as the jazz piano book to try and understand and, teach myself how to play jazz. No, it's just way too overwhelming. If you don't already understand everything that's in it, it's completely overwhelming. So hopefully I'm doing everyone here a nice service by kind of helping you to walk through it in a way that's just not going to overwhelm you. And also to go through bits of it that go, well, I'm not sure I agree with that. And I don't know why he's put it this way, Anyway, so stay tuned because if you're interested in this, the next video on modes of the melodic minor and sus chords and sus flat 9 is going to be really useful and really interesting. And as always, it takes me ages to edit these videos. A lot of love and craft goes into, editing them and presenting these to you guys. They take me a lot of time. So, if you appreciate this, please do give a thumbs up, a like, leave comments, subscribe, click on the notification bell if you want to know when the videos are being launched. Please do leave comments, whether you agree with me or not. And I'll see you at the next video. I do have space for new students at the moment, if you're interested, for online teaching, as well as in person in Yorkshire in England. And see you at the next video. Go do lots of practicing or watch some of my other videos. Take care. Have fun. Goodbye.